This is a Dalarna University production.
Very welcome. I'm set to Dr. Bob Deutsch, and I start directly with our questions. I would like to ask if you can elaborate on what a brand, or as you say, attachment has. What these concepts? What are the relevance of these concepts for a regional university as us?
Well, thank you for having me. I think the relevance of attachment, not only to a regional university, but to anything, it really is the underlying structure of how people experience what you're offering, what people expect of what you're offering, how people develop ideas, beliefs, and feelings about that. And that happens fairly quickly, and to very great extent, not just on the facts of the matter, but on the real human dynamic of emotion. So how a person comes to believe this university versus that university, this is better than that, I want that, not that, or how a person comes to believe that I like this product better than this product, or I believe in this system of government, I don't believe in that system of government. You could say, at least from my point of view, is nothing less. It's not a marketing issue. It's the most human issue, and I call that attachment. And attachment, how people come to belong, let's call it, to something, an idea, their idea of another person, of a product, of an institution. It drives all behavior. After the fact, you could have all kinds of rationalizations, but the rationalizations don't create the inclination. The inclination happens in a totally faster, different, emotionally based way, and then we overlay all this intellect on it. But the intellect doesn't drive the decision. It doesn't drive the process, and therefore, I would say, those of us who think about these kind of things, we have a great responsibility. One, to understand something about other people. And by the understanding, I don't mean being able to explain. In a sense, being able to explain is totally different from understanding. The best person who ever talked about the difference between explanation and understanding is Václav Havel, the playwright who became president of Czechoslovakia. And his idea of, he said when the Soviet Union fell, what the world needs now is less explanation and more understanding. And by that he meant explanation is looking at something from the outside in a very objective way, and through a series of successive approximations you get to comprehend what it is. He said, that's not life. In contrast, to understand something, you can't look at it from the outside. You have to subjectively experience it, what he called, in its unfolding, from the inside. And then you have at least a chance to help yourself and help others at the same time. So when you take it, attachment, what commercial people call branding, but if you take it as in this larger framework of attachment, that is a basic fundamental dynamic of life, then you have more responsibility, more opportunity, and you have to, I call it, you have to be careful. Care-full. Because you're dealing with something very fundamental. So it's not a game, it's not a business process. It's life.
Yes, very well. Thank you. What would you say would be the to be the key elements in a vision for a university or education institution?
That's a good question. Everything nowadays, let me say it this way, I hear all around the world one underlying narrative. I call it the world of two, T-O-O, okay? The world is too fast, too complex, too competitive. I hear that everywhere, relative to people's own experience. And I think that's a fair assessment of the world. And the task that everyone has now in the face of that world of too fast, too complex, too competitive is how do we address it in a way that we can innovate, create something new, but not negate the past in doing it. So that itself is a contradiction. But to me, that's the great challenge of today, which is of particularly of a educational institution, because it's the challenge that every human being has in their own life every day. And that's what an educational institution must address. And that is, how do I deal with the tension between tradition, the past, and modernity, the present and the future. And you hear it and you could see it in everything. Even I recently saw on television a documentary about ballerinas, okay? Mm-hmm. And in one sense you could look at it and say, okay, that's an interesting story about ballerinas, which it was. But if you listen with what Freud called listening with a third ear, right? What you hear is these ballerinas talking about how could I be true to the past masters? How could I be true to the traditions of ballet, while all the while finding how to express my own identity within that structure, you know? And that's the task of everybody. You don't have to be a great dancer, you know? It's like I've recently spoken to some very expert jazz musicians, for example. They talk about jazz in a very interesting way. And that way is jazz has a lot of rules, but it's new every night. So how does that happen? You know? You have to live within a structure, but then use that structure to innovate and, as the musicians say, fly, right? And for that, you know, even Picasso said that, you know, I have to learn to be as good of an artist as my father and then leave it all behind. But I have to learn it first, right? And then one, in terms of leaving it and going further, that entails more than just knowledge. It entails trust, two kinds of trust, I think. Trusting yourself and trusting others, right? Meaning they could help you bring forth what's in you, and hopefully in response or together you could do the same for them. So it's a co-creative process, right? And the other thing is being open, and by that I mean not having to know the end at the beginning. You know, give yourself the leeway and the opportunity and the freedom, the feeling of freedom, where it's somewhat unpredictable, but let's see what happens. You know, I've spoken in my career, I've been lucky enough at certain points in my career to speak with experts from different fields, real experts. And there are many things interesting about them. One thing is, before they're interested in problem solving, they're interested in problem structuring, right? That's fabulous. To watch that happen, it gives you energy, right? But you have to have a certain belief that you'll, without knowing exactly the way, you'll find the way, right? So there's that interplay of hope, desire, knowledge, and I think an acknowledgement of just being alive to yourself and to others.
Thank you. And we are living in a competitive world where all the many education offerings are at many universities, and sometimes education is shown as a commodity or a product which you want to sell to the market.
Yeah.
What's your and then of course part of that is strengthening your brand, to have your brand identity, to be sellable, to attract the customer, the student to come to our university, to our institutions. What's your ideas of that?
Well, I think I have two sides of a story in response to that question, which again I think is a very good question. I don't like to think of education as a product, because I think it puts education in too small of a category, and it's a one-sided affair. I, the university, have knowledge that you, the student, need, and I'm going to provide it for you. Okay? So open your mouth, your eyes, and your ears, and I'll throw it down to you. Right? Of course you need knowledge. But in a sense, that's the smallest part of the story. The bigger part of the story, I think, the very human part of the story, is through your encounter with new knowledge, to find out something more about you, okay? And where your passions lie, you know? So if I was forced to say what the product of education is, it's not knowledge, it's passion. Find yourself. Find what's real for you. Find what you cannot not do. And go with that. That takes time, most of the time. Sometimes it happens like that. Most of the time it takes time. It also takes acknowledging your own feelings, your own capacities, your own lack of capacities, and how could you, all the while acknowledging your limitations, use your limitations to discover? And we have, there's all kinds of examples from that, from anyone who has accomplished anything. It's like, yes, everyone has the so-called downside, but not so much how you overcome by putting that away, but how do you overcome by acknowledging and addressing them? Then you're really into being a human being. So, igniting or helping a person just by presenting things to them, and let them discover what arouses them and what repels them, and discover for themselves, are there good reasons for that? Or are there not good reasons for that? And you have to make your own determination about that. And if you follow your passion, I mean, you could say one thing about human beings, it's sort of bred in the bone, is when you're in the presence of someone who's living a vital life, because they're living their passion, vitality is contagious. And that's what a teacher should be. They should be so immersed and in love with their own passions and expertise that it's easily recognizable and can't be denied. And then the other task, I think, of a teacher is to be a mentor, not a teacher. To be a teacher plus being a mentor. And a mentor is a mutuality. How do I help you find you, and how do you help me expand also? So no one has all the answers. No one is a complete story, hopefully. Because when that happens, that's the end. So it's a matter of a sort of mutual self-expansion in the ultimate sense. Then life is glorious, even when it's not, because life is hard.
Yes.
But in the face of it being hard, if you're living that thing that's really the most innermost thing of you, and expressing that in what you do and how you live, it's grand.
A final question. The previous person in this series, Douglas Hind, also mentioned improvisation as perhaps the important competence in the future. And you also mentioned you were into discussing improvisation in your lecture. Talking about the future competencies, what would you say would be a future competence in our world, in now and in the future?
Yeah. So let's talk for a moment about improvisation from an improvisational point of view. Okay, improvisation requires two things in terms of, let's say, an acting class of improvisation. One is, there's no such thing as no. Right?
Yeah.
You can't have the feeling of no, let alone say no. Right? You have to say yes. I mean, think it. But the fundamental dynamic of improvisation is you not only relate to what people say, you relate to how you feel in response to what they say, and you react to the feeling. That's improvisation in terms of acting. In the context of not acting, I would very quickly jump to something a very smart man named Thomas Friedman, who writes editorial articles for the New York Times, has written. One article recently he wrote is entitled, "Everyone needs to be their own startup." And he doesn't mean you have to start up at your own company. He means you could work in a huge company and you know, whatever you're doing. But nowadays, because complexity and competition, you have to be innovative on a daily basis, or else you're going to be out. You're going to be passé. And I think I have a certain idea about innovation. Innovation is not just a matter of what you know. There's a lot of people who have almost total knowledge of their field. They have no innovative capacity. They're very good, but they just don't do that. To innovate, to be an innovative person, I'm talking about personal innovation. I'm not talking about being Stephen Jobs and making all these products. On your own daily life, in your own daily life, how does one be personally innovative? And I think for that, you need the capacity to, as I would say it, pass what you know, the knowledge you know, through the sieve, through the filter of who you are. And that becomes, your whole idea of who you are becomes like a refractory prism that your knowledge passes through and gets spread in different ways, okay? That's the essence of innovation. So you have to know, you have to have knowledge base, but you also have to have another kind of knowledge base, which is knowledge about your own self. And when those two meet at the point of, I like to say, the point where memory meets imagination, then you're into the space of innovation. And if you could help, if an educational institution helps people even just how to approach that, you know, there's no the solution. But if you have an approach and a way of thinking and a point of view about how to address that, then you have every right to be known as a great institution.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.